Good morning. Without a doubt, Come Thou Fount is one of my top 5 favorite hymns in our hymnals. Thank you so much to the quartet for singing it and to Jasmine for rocking the organ for it. Now, in the grand Unitarian tradition, the words are slightly different than the version used in most Christian churches. And you know what? That suits me just fine, because this hymn has always spoken to a deep place in me, especially the words of the second and third verses. So I did a little research. These 2 verses in particular were written by Eugene Navius. And I think the reason why these words have always called out to me is that Eugene Navius served the UUA in the Religious Education Department for 29 years and left as director of the department. He was a religious educator, and he spoke the language of religious education. And this hymn speaks to the ultimate purpose of religious education. So I'm going to use this hymn today as our guiding text as I talk with you about some of the lessons I've learned at Cedar Lane, serving as your religious educator for the past 3 years, and as I talk with you about where I see the future of religious education going. I also invite you to reflect on each of these lines and see what meaning they have in your life too. So I'm going to use the text of the second verse to talk about some of what I've learned here at Cedar Lane. Let's take it line by line. The first line: Come, thy fount of every vision, lift our eyes to what may come. So lift our eyes to what may come can have a couple of different meanings. I see it as an expression of hope, and I see it as an expression of change. Worship is one of the ways we make hope real at Cedar Lane. When we worship, we are engaging in a practice where we share our collective hopes for the future. And something I've learned at Cedar Lane is how essential a strong worship life for our children, youth, and families truly is. So I remember my first year at Cedar Lane, and I was really starting to track attendance in our children's chapels. And we were getting an average of 85 to 90 kids, teachers, parents, and other supportive adults attending. That's an incredible average attendance for a children's chapel. In fact, it's larger than the average attendance of at least half of our UU congregations across the nation. And that's just in our chapel. It made me realize that really my role had a much stronger worship responsibility than I had initially imagined. And these chapels are beloved by the congregation. From back in the day, building the chapel especially for children to have a worship space, to hearing from so many children that chapel is actually their favorite part of the RE program. So my takeaway: worship isn't just the central activity of the church, it's also the central activity of the religious education program. It is essential that we embrace how important these chapels are to our children and families, and that they continue weekly in the future. So now let's take a look at the other meaning of that line as an expression of change. Lift our eyes to what may come, not to what has already happened. Transition can keep us from lifting our eyes to what may come. It's something I felt deeply as your religious educator. So many people want to go back to the way how it used to be. I remember in my first month or two, someone told me that there were only 200 kids in the program. They would get excited when it was back up at 500. So folks, 200 is a very large religious education program in our faith. It's one of the top 20 largest programs in the country. Times are just different now than they were decades ago. Church has a less important role in many folks' lives. The old model was built on the backs of housewives that the church assumed could volunteer as their primary job during the week. And Sunday mornings are no longer sacrosanct. And the religious education program, our competition isn't other churches, it's extracurricular activities like drama and sports. And unless we embrace the times we're in and focus on relevancy, our eyes will never be lifted on what may come. We have to choose relevance over tradition. Now, this doesn't mean we can't update traditions to be relevant for our age or that every tradition is inherently bad. There are some beautiful traditions in the religious education program at Cedar Lane. But my takeaway, once our focus becomes preserving the tradition over meeting the needs of current and future families, then our eyes fail to see what may come. So let's take a look at the second line of the second verse. See the lion and the young lamb dwell together in thy home. So there are a number of things that popped up in my mind when I started to look more deeply at this line. And I want to talk with you about two of them: family ministry and space. I've long been a believer in the importance of family ministry, and I'm glad Cedar Lane has been able to slowly embrace this guiding framework of family ministry. Religious education is one component of family ministry, but family ministry is a more holistic approach. Sure, education is part of it, and so is worship, but so are connections and community building. Other denominations and faith have been focused on family ministry for decades. And our faith over the past 5 years or so has really started to come to take family ministry a lot more seriously. One of my deepest hopes for Cedar Lane is that you continue to embrace family ministry in a more holistic approach to ministry with children, youth, and families. Because we've done a good job at Cedar Lane these past 3 years of building up a family ministry approach to our religious education program, one that is rooted in the past traditions but relevant for today's families. Family ministry is no longer the future, it's the here and now, especially when families are with each other 24/7 for this foreseeable future in our time of coronavirus. Homes have lions dwelling with lambs, cats dwelling with dogs, monsters under the bed dwelling with aliens from outer space, and so much more. My takeaway: ministry has to speak to the whole of the family, where it won't speak to any part of it effectively. The final point I want to make from this verse, again, it's see the lion and the young lamb dwell together in thy home, is about that final word, home. And how can we make children and youth see Cedar Lane as their home? It really comes down to the people and the place. Space matters. What would it take for the classrooms at Cedar Lane to be spaces intentionally designed for children and youth that adults are sometimes allowed to use? What message would that give to families? What message would it give to our children? Our rooms are multi-purpose, which, although the utilitarian in me can understand, the Unitarian in me asks, how is that preventing children from seeing Cedar Lane as their home? Every year, we've worked on making some cosmetic upgrades, from painting the cabinets to be a more vibrant color, to our beautiful family ministry resource wall, to upgrading room 10 to be a teacher resource room. My sincere hope is that during the upcoming building renovation, care and attention are paid to designing classroom spaces with children in mind, not with multi-use in mind. My takeaway: if spaces aren't designed for children, families won't feel truly at home. So the third line of that second verse is, hear the cries of war fall silent, feel our love glow like the sun. I've said it before during teacher recruitment and training, and I'll say it here again. The most important quality for a teacher in the RE program is not content knowledge, it's love. It's that you love and care for this generation of children and youth and want to invest your time in their lives. Love is the most important thing in an RE program and a family ministry program. Decades from now, it's doubtful that our children will remember any one particular lesson from a Sunday morning, but they will remember the adults that they loved, that loved them, and that they could rely on when times were tough. They will remember walking into a church where everyone loved them just the way they were, who greeted them by name, crouched down on their knees to ask how their week was. Well, you get the idea. My takeaway: love is the most essential quality for faith formation, and this love and acceptance is why we need church. And the final line of the second verse, when we all serve one another, then our heaven is begun. Perhaps my most favorite line in the entire song. When we all serve one another, then our heaven is begun. Honestly, I think that's become an important part of my personal theology just because of this hymn. But today I want to talk about the importance of service. Cedar Lane has a strong percentage of non-parents teaching in the program, and I'm proud of that. But in my dream religious education program, there would be 0 parents teaching because parents would be focused on boosting their own spiritual development, getting recharged in our worship services, and building their own faith. Now, sure, I understand some parents love spending their time in the RE classroom with their kids, but in my ideal world, it's all non-parents teaching. My takeaway here is that the religious education program has to be a ministry of and by the entire congregation. If we want to see our UU values more in the world, then our top priority has to be sharing and building those UU values in current and future generations. And how do we do that? Through religious education and family ministry. So we've taken a look at the second verse and what lessons it showed me from Cedar Lane. So how about we listen to that "Come Thou Fount" one more time, and then we'll talk about the third verse. Please go ahead and play "Come Thou Fount." Beautiful, just beautiful. I'm so glad they did that hymn for me today. So now let's talk about the third verse of "Come Thou Fount," and how it points us toward the future of Unitarian Universalist religious education, faith development, and family ministry. The first verse reads, "Come Thou Fount of inspiration, turn our lives to higher ways." So how do we best turn our lives to higher ways? I hear this as a question of how do we teach others, even ourselves, about Unitarian Universalism and how to live a UU life in today's society. And I think far and away, the best way we transmit what being a Unitarian Universalist means is through mentorship over instruction, which means small groups over classes. What would it look like if everyone in the congregation had a mentor and everyone in the congregation had a mentee? What would it look like if every person in the church was in at least 2 small groups? One that met regularly for years and one that met for up to a year so you could get to know more people. What would it look like if we modeled Unitarian Universalism in all that we do and say as a way to show what it means to be a UU through our regular actions and conversations? What if, in addition to having, let's say, a group of pastoral visitors, we also had a group of spiritual coaches? They're to help coach you in living a UU life and helping you learn more about your own spirituality. We have to take a relational approach to religious education and faith formation. We do not live in isolation. Even in the midst of this pandemic, we are still connected to each other. So then how can we do faith formation in isolation? Just through individual study. It's easy to learn about values in private when we don't expect to live our lives out loud and to live our values out loud. We have to keep moving away from a head-based, content-based approach to religious education and one that is focused on mentorship, showing over preaching, and pulls from the heart. A communal approach is needed for our interconnected life. The future of religious education is relational. So the second line of our second verse is, "Lift our gloom and desperation, show the promise of this day." So if there's one thing I tried to bring to the program, it was joy. Joy in the office, joy in the chapels, joy through events, joys in the hallways, joy in the classrooms, and even joy on the Zoom calls before we go live for worship. Because right now, times are so hard. We have to have moments of joy in our lives, and part of our job as a spiritual practice is to actively look for those moments of joy. I've heard it said by many that joy is an act of resistance, but we need more than just joyful resistance. We need a pedagogy of joy, where joy is part of the entire religious education process. From teachers filled with joy to be with their small group, to hearing the sounds of joyful laughter roaring from the classrooms, to yes, even hearing expressions of joy in our worship services. The future of religious education is joy. So the third line in this verse is perhaps the most telling for the future of faith development. Help us bind ourselves in union. Help our hands tell of our love. Let's tackle this one in its two parts too. The first is to help bind ourselves in union. This to me reads as if it's a call for a committed, beloved community. If we see families as a unit, we need a religious education program that speaks to all members of the family and speaks to that family as a unit. This is one reason why I'm such a proponent of a family ministry-based approach. Otherwise, we aren't just focusing on the ties that bond our family units together. We have to have an integrated family ministry approach. The family ministry lens needs to be in all we do, from pastoral care to social justice to religious education to worship to stewardship to all of those spaces in between. This is also why I'm a proponent of seeing classes more like small group ministry as opposed to a classroom. We learn who we are in relation to others. We learn how to love by having to practice it in a community. We learn how to apply our faith values only by seeing how our choices impact others. Learning to bind ourselves in union is the same as learning how to live in a covenanted community. In Unitarian Universalism, we make the conscious choice to bind ourselves to fellow congregants by agreeing to uphold the same covenant. Speaking of choices, let's take a look at the second half of that line. Help our hands tell of our love. Love is a choice we make because connections are a choice we make. Connection is work, and it's important work. If it's that important to you, you have to co-own it. Kids don't drive themselves to church, and while kids don't log on to a Zoom account all by themselves, although now they might know how to do that. Love is a choice that we make. And it's a choice of love to be a teacher and mentor to children whom are not your own. It's a choice of love to help mentor someone else in the church, or to help them when they least expect it and most need it. This text calls our hands to tell of our love, for us to put our love into action. So how are you putting that Unitarian Universalist love into action? How are you showing love to each other? How are you showing someone else what it truly means to love one another? We have to be the people who choose love and choose to show our love to each other. The future of religious education is holistic love. So the final line, with thine aid, O fount of justice, earth be fair as heaven above. Justice. Justice also needs to be the core of our religious education programs. Justice is how we put our Unitarian Universalist values into practice in the world. If we don't have justice as an essential component of the RE program, then we are failing to show how to live UU values in the real world. So then what's the point? We need to be working with our children and youth to hear from them what their social justice passions are. I would love to see a program where social justice organizers meet one-on-one with children and youth and have a coaching session where the social justice coach helps the youth discover what social justice passions they might have and to come up with a plan for how to get engaged around the issue. Especially right now in our society, we have to make racial justice at the center of what we do, and that includes religious education. I think our congregations would be wise to intentionally pause from regular faith development programs over the upcoming year and use this time to ensure that anti-racism and multiculturalism is at the heart and center of what and how we teach. The future of religious education is justice. So there you have it. Let me recap my takeaways and what I see as the future of religious education. So my 6 takeaways. Worship isn't just the central activity of the church, it's also the central activity of the religious education program. Once our focus becomes preserving the tradition over meeting the current and future needs of our families, then our eyes fail to see what may come. Ministry has to speak to the whole of the family, or it won't speak to any part of it effectively. Number 4, if spaces aren't designed for children, families won't feel truly at home. Number 5, love is the most essential quality for faith formation, and this love and acceptance is why we need church. And number 6, the religious education program has to be a ministry of and by the entire congregation. And then my 4 futures of religious education. The future of religious education is relational. The future of religious education is joy. The future of religious education is holistic love. And the future of religious education is justice. Thank you for having me these past 3 years. It's been a blessing. I hope you've also learned a lot during these past 3 years, and I wish every single one of you all the best, and wish all the best for the Cedar Lane Religious Education Program now and in the years ahead. So may it be. Amen.